Well, how did you feel when you heard that line, "The earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea"? It's a vision to hold on to these days, isn't it? All right. This is the third and final reflection in the 3-week series about different categories of faith expression in the United Church context. And these reflections are based on insights from Janet Gear's book, Undivided Love. Once again, I encourage you to identify what fits easily into your faith framework and to open your hearts and minds to ideas and faith expressions that are different from yours. As Gear says, we do not all speak the same language about God. And yet, we are all part of the same communion of faith, seeking to find God and to follow the way of Jesus. So here's a quick reminder of the 5 categories that Janet Gear identifies. Evangelical lived faith. It's there, right? It's not changing. Okay, it's a review. Evangelical lived faith. That was the first one we reflected on, and if you remember, that's the one that's really focused on relationship with God through Jesus. So when I think evangelical, I think Jesus, because that's sort of the central focus. The second one, there are 3 of these categories that start with the letter E, and so I want to make sure that you can distinguish them. So the second one is ecclesial lived faith. There we go. And that came from the word for gathering, ecclesia, right? And that's all about church. And the church is experienced as the presence of Christ in the world. Missional lived faith, we looked at that last week too. I think of this as the hands and feet of Jesus. So people who are missional believe that they are called to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. Today, we're going to look in a moment at ecumenical lived faith, not quite yet, and spiritual lived faith. So I was not surprised to hear from several of you last week that the categories of ecclesial lived faith and missional lived faith resonated with you. No big surprise there. But I know for a fact that there are also evangelicals and ecumenicals and spirituals who are part of this faith community. They may be fewer in number, which is often the case in United Churches. And those who are part of the majority are called to practice authentic listening to and learning from those who may be smaller in number, but are no less an indispensable part of the functioning faith community. Okay, now we can talk about ecumenical lived faith. Ecumenicals take a wide view. They tend to look at the big picture. In fact, if I were going to look for just a phrase to remind me of what ecumenicals are about, I would think big picture. So they often have a good sense of cause and effect and how things are interconnected, how they fit together. Ecumenicals have this amazing capacity for engaging with issues that are larger than their own lives and their own experience. And they bring a confidence to this focus that is rooted in the witness of the biblical story, of ancient forebears and contemporary people who hold firmly to God's promise of abundant life for all. That hope of the knowledge of the Lord covering the whole world like the waters cover the sea, right? While ecumenicals may not speak of their faith in the ways that evangelicals do, or even ecclesials, ecumenicals, like the missionals, live their faith in action. It's about the doing. And yet, Gear, the author, has placed ecumenicals in a category separate from the missionals. They're both about action-oriented faith, but there are differences. So let's unpack that a little bit. If you recall, the missional is busy looking after those necessary practical things that need doing, right? Making sure the shelves at the food bank get replenished frequently, regularly, knitting prayer shawls, knitting mittens for the mitten tree, collecting furniture for a refugee family, delivering meals to those who can't get out, visiting people in the hospital in long-term care. Those are the kinds of things that missionals are busy doing. And thank God for the missionals who lead the church out into the world to serve those who are suffering. The ecumenical cares about all these things too, but uses a wider lens to see a bigger picture. The ecumenical lives and works into this overarching vision, a vision that is ancient and contemporary. It is the vision of flourishing life for all of creation, not just the people who need the food bank or the people who are unhoused on the street corner. The ecumenical thinks way bigger than that. Where there's inequity or injustice or suffering, the ecumenical sees it and asks the question, why? Why? They allow the world's pain to demand their attention and to keep it. And then they set about discerning how justice can happen in that situation. For an ecumenical, the purpose of the church is to be an agent of God's justice, peace, and reconciliation. Ecumenicals are the prophetic voices in our congregations. We don't always like to hear them because they bring us to account, right? They want action to follow the words. If you know an ecumenical, you know how hard they work to get people on board to mend God's world. They'll ask you to march, to lobby, to post signs, to write letters, to raise funds, to protest, to eat local, to grow only native plants, to stop using plastics, to recycle, to ride your bicycle and turn the heat down. That's pretty apt today. They may not think, these ecumenicals, to invite you to a Bible study or to church, but they'll encourage you to attend a conference on climate justice. And they may even offer to pay your way because it's that important to them. An ecumenical's longing for justice is inseparable from their longing for God. The word ecumenical, you may know this, comes from the Greek word oikumene, which carries the meaning of the whole inhabited earth. You see the wide view. The ecumenical's lived faith is a commitment to the well-being of the household of God, the kingdom of Christ, that is, the whole world. In the Hebrew scriptures, the ecumenical sees the theme of God's justice as a love that brings peace and flourishing and reconciliation. And in Jesus' kingdom teachings, ecumenicals find their inspiration to partner in establishing a world that's founded on love and justice. Key biblical texts include the passages from Isaiah that were read for us a moment ago by Jane, passages that describe the peaceable kingdom where there's enough for everyone to flourish and where creatures live in harmony with each other and creation. The strengths of the ecumenical are critical assets to the church. They bring expertise because they check into things, they research, they study, they ask why. They bring scope, again, that wideness of vision. They bring analysis, vision, purpose, and hope, and integrity. They live what they believe. Without these precious gifts, the church flounders and slips into complacency and oversimplification. And yet there's that shadow hovering in the distance, right? Janet Geer identifies the shadow for this category as three intertwined aspects: ideology, cynicism, and despair. If the system of ideals and ideas, the ideology, becomes the only driving force behind the ecumenical's justice seeking, then what is lost is the grace of divine partnership, right? It's like we're doing it and God doesn't have a place in it. The hope is no longer in God, from whom the call to justice first came. The ecumenical may become dogmatic and less than generous with those who are not of the same theological ilk. And this can happen when there's burnout or disappointment, both of which are always on the sidelines, waiting to pounce when change for good is slow to happen, when people don't engage in their cause, and when the effort seems pointless. Here's the antidote, says Geer: spiritual grounding and restored faith. Bring it back to God, right? Bring it home to God. When the focus becomes solely the work of the cause and the drive to achieve results by our own strength and wit, we need to return to the source. To remember and feel again the yearning for God's peaceable kingdom, to dream God's dream of justice and equity, to recommit to partnering with the one who transforms and empowers. And it is the last category, which we will look at shortly, the spiritual lived faith, that is best equipped to offer the way to solace and renewal for the ecumenical, who yearns to recover the grace and faith needed to sustain the vision of a flourishing creation. Maybe later today or maybe next week I'll talk a little bit, we'll do some feedback around all this stuff, and we'll talk a bit about how the different categories complement each other, because where there's a shadow in one, it's another category that has the capacity to offer the antidote to that shadow. So it'll be interesting to look at that. So now we're going to sing our ecumenical hymn. It's called Live into Hope, and it's all about that vision, that Isaiah vision. Let's stand to sing it.